Tonight, Layla entered the ballroom with a confidence she hadn't felt in years, finally ready to leave the husband who insisted she was too cheap and embarrassing for his world. Ryan thought he'd successfully banned her, but Layla didn't come to beg. She came to shine. As he panicked, she delivered the ultimate blow. "You said I was too ugly to stand next to you. But the truth is, my spirit is too beautiful for a soul as rotten as yours." Here is how she took her power back. What would you have done in her shoes? Subscribe and let me know below. The silence of the expansive, high-end apartment was usually suffocating, a curated museum of beige velvet and chrome accents that Ryan called home. But tonight, standing before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the master bedroom, with the ambient recessed lighting casting a soft glow against the walls, Layla Carter felt a rare, fluttering warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the thermostat. She smoothed her trembling hands down the front of the burgundy silk dress she had hidden in the back of her closet for weeks, the rich fabric drinking in the dim light and casting a luminous reflection against her deep brown skin that made her look, for the first time in months, like the woman she used to be before she became Ryan's wife. At 29, she shouldn't have felt like a tolerated guest in her own life. Yet as she turned slightly to catch her profile, allowing the high slit of the gown to whisper against her thigh, she allowed herself a moment of dangerous vanity, thinking that perhaps tonight, finally, she looked like she belonged in the world Ryan was so desperate to conquer. The dress was a statement, a bold declaration of elegance that she hoped would bridge the widening chasm between them, and she practiced a smile that was equal parts radiant and terrified, waiting for the sound of the front door. The spell was broken not by a word, but by the heavy thud of the electronic lock disengaging and the sharp, rhythmic clicking of dress shoes on the hardwood floor, announcing Ryan's arrival like a ticking clock counting down to a detonation. He swept into the bedroom with the chaotic energy of a storm front, his eyes passing over her reflection in the glass without a flicker of recognition or appreciation, as if she were merely another piece of expensive furniture he had selected for its utility rather than its beauty. He marched straight to the walnut dresser, his fingers agitated as they dug through a velvet tray in search of his onyx cufflinks, the tension radiating off his shoulders sharp enough to cut the air. Layla took a tentative step forward, her heart hammering a hopeful rhythm against her ribs as she reached out to straighten the collar of his shirt, a gesture of intimacy she craved to settle her nerves. But before her fingers could graze the starch of his white button-down, he shifted his weight, angling his body away from her touch with a fluidity that was physically polite but emotionally brutal. "How do I look?" she asked, the question hanging in the air, fragile and desperate, her voice betraying the hours she had spent in the salon chair, trying to tame her natural curls into something acceptable. Ryan paused then, his hands freezing on his cuffs, and he finally looked at her through the mirror, not with affection, but with the weary, critical gaze of an art appraiser looking at a forgery. You're actually planning to wear that?" he asked, the sigh that escaped his lips carrying a weight of disappointment that crushed her smile instantly. When she stammered that the color flattered her skin, hoping to salvage the moment, he shook his head with a patronizing slowness, turning around to step closer and inspect her as if she were a specimen under a microscope. "The color isn't the problem, Layla. It's the vibe," he said, the word dripping with unsaid implications, his voice dropping to that calm, educational tone he used when he wanted to make her feel small without raising his voice. "You look like you're trying too hard, like you're going to a high school prom, not a strategic cocktail mixer with my senior partners." He reached out, his fingers brushing against a loose tendril of her hair, not to caress, but to flick it back into place with disdain. "And the hair! It's just too wild, too untamed for this crowd." Layla felt the sting of tears pricking her eyelids, but she fought them back, desperation making her bold as she pleaded that she just wanted to be with him, promising to sit quietly and not embarrass him. Ryan's expression hardened into ice, and he leaned in, his voice dangerously soft. "I am doing this to protect you, don't you see?" he said, staring deep into her eyes as he delivered the final blow, wrapped in the guise of benevolence. "The wives at this event are sharks, Layla, and you. You would look lost, out of place, cheap even, and I won't let you become a punchline. I already told them you have a migraine, so take that off, wash your face before that makeup ruins your skin, and stay here." He didn't wait for an answer, grabbing his blazer and striding out of the room, the apartment door slamming shut moments later, leaving her standing in the silence of the bedroom. The burgundy silk suddenly feeling heavy and ridiculous on her skin, a costume for a play she had been fired from. She was about to unzip the dress, to accept the narrative he had spun for her, and retreat into the shadows when a chime echoed from the entryway console, a bright, cheerful sound that contrasted with the gloom settling over her. Ryan had left his iPad. She walked over, intending to turn it off, but the screen lit up with a notification from a group chat titled The Wolf Pack. The preview text froze the blood in her veins. "My wife tried to wear this red thing. Looked like a walking set of curtains. Thank God I shut that down," Ryan had written, the timestamp less than a minute old. Below it, a colleague had replied, "Good call. Bringing her would kill your vibe with the boss," to which Ryan had responded with a final gut-wrenching confirmation that shattered the last remnant of her delusion. Exactly, she just looked so cheap. The device slipped from her numb fingers onto the table, the cruel blue light illuminating the tears that finally spilled over, not of sadness, but of an awakening rage that whispered she had finally had enough. The living room was submerged in a suffocating gloom, illuminated only by the flickering, muted blue light of the television, which cast long, dancing shadows across the pristine furniture that Layla was terrified to wrinkle. But tonight she didn't care about the upholstery as she sat on the edge of the beige sofa with a cotton pad in her hand, scrubbing at her cheek with a ferocity that bordered on self-harm. She wasn't just wiping away the expensive foundation she had applied with such hope only hours earlier. She was trying to erase the woman Ryan found so offensive, rubbing until the skin around her eyes and cheekbones turned a raw, angry red that stung in the cool air of the apartment. Every swipe of the makeup remover felt like a physical punishment for her own foolishness. And as the layers of cosmetic perfection came away to reveal the dark circles and swollen eyes beneath, the silence of the room was filled with the echoing ghosts of Ryan's voice from the past 3 years. Comments she had previously brushed off as constructive criticism now coalescing into a clear, malicious pattern. She remembered the time she laughed at a dinner party, a full-throated, joyous sound, only for Ryan to squeeze her knee under the table until it bruised, whispering later in the car that she needed to tone it down because she sounded like a hyena. Or the time she bought a bright yellow sundress and he smirked, telling her to maybe stick to neutrals, babe, because that color makes you look too dark, like a shadow. These memories were razor blades slicing through her composure, each one a testament to how methodically he had chipped away at her confidence, until she was nothing but a sculpture of his own making, terrified to speak, to dress, or to exist without his approval. The sharp, rhythmic rapping on the front door shattered her spiral of self-loathing, and before she could even compose herself or hide the evidence of her breakdown, the door swung open to reveal Jenna, her neighbor and lifeline, who breezed in with the chaotic energy of a hurricane, clutching a bottle of supermarket Merlot and a bag of pretzels. Jenna's usual boisterous greeting died in her throat as her eyes adjusted to the dim light and landed on Layla, who was curled into a ball of misery, and then drifted to the iPad that was still glowing like a radioactive isotope on the coffee table. Jenna didn't ask what was wrong. She simply set the wine down with a heavy thud, marched over to the device, and read the messages that Layla hadn't had the strength to close, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the cruelty displayed in high definition. Cheap? A walking set of curtains? Jenna read the words aloud, her voice trembling not with sadness, but with a volcanic rage that filled the quiet room. What the hell is wrong with him, Layla? This is Ryan? The man who pretends to be Mr. Perfect Gentleman in the elevator? Layla flinched at the harshness of the tone, her instinct to protect her husband kicking in, even as her heart lay in pieces on the floor, and she whispered in a voice that sounded broken, even to her own ears, that perhaps he was right. Maybe he's right, Jenna, Layla said, wiping a fresh tear that tracked through the redness on her cheek. I don't know how to dress for these things. I don't know the etiquette, and I just end up making him look bad. Jenna looked at her friend with an expression of absolute horror, then grabbed a packet of tissues and slammed it onto the table with enough force to make the decorative vase rattle. "Stop it," Jenna commanded, sitting down hard on the sofa and invading Layla's personal space, forcing eye contact. "Stop drinking his poison right now. Layla, look at me. He doesn't insult you because you're ugly or incompetent. He insults you because he needs to feel superior." Layla tried to look away, muttering that he was still her husband and he provided for them, but Jenna wouldn't let her retreat into the comfort of denial. "A husband protects his wife," Jenna said, her voice dropping to a fierce, intense whisper that cut through Layla's defenses. "A husband doesn't throw his wife into a pit of wolves to get a few laughs from his frat boy colleagues. You are not living with a partner, Layla. You are living with a bully who is emotionally abusing you. He wants you small so he can feel big. Don't you understand that?" The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable, and for the first time, Layla didn't argue. Instead, she reached for the iPad with a trembling hand. But this time, she didn't just stare at the most recent message. She began to scroll back, diving into the archives of the Wolfpack chat history, searching for the truth. It was a graveyard of her dignity. For 2 years, Ryan had been documenting her failures for an audience of sycophants. There were jokes about her cooking, captioned, "Looks like charcoal again," photos of her sleeping with her mouth open that he had taken without her consent, and mocking comments about her family's background, all met with "ha-ha" and thumbs-up reactions from men she had welcomed into her home for dinner. She saw a message from last Christmas where he bragged about buying her a vacuum cleaner instead of the jewelry she wanted because she needs to learn her place, and suddenly, the sorrow that had been drowning her began to evaporate, replaced by a cold, hard knot of revulsion. This wasn't love, and it wasn't even a difficult marriage. It was a calculated campaign to devalue her human worth. Jenna watched the transformation happen in real time, seeing the slump in Layla's shoulders straighten and the tears dry up as the realization took root. Layla finally looked up from the screen, her eyes dry and burning with a new, terrifying clarity, realizing that the man she'd been crying over didn't exist, and the man who did exist was a small, insecure creature who built his throne on her back. She closed the iPad cover with a soft, final click that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room, the nausea in her stomach settling into a cold resolve. She was done crying for a man who used her tears as ink for his comedy routine. The morning sun flooded the kitchen with a brightness that felt almost surgical, exposing the dust motes dancing in the air and casting long, sharp shadows across the marble countertops where Layla stood, her spine rigid as she listened to the sound of the key turning in the lock. It was 7 o'clock in the morning, and the apartment, usually a sanctuary of silence, was suddenly invaded by the cheerful, oblivious whistling of a man who believed he had successfully managed a crisis. For Ryan strolled into the room with the loose-limbed swagger of someone who had slept the deep, untroubled sleep of the righteous. He looked irritatingly fresh, his skin glowing and his mood buoyant, as he tossed his suit jacket carelessly onto one of the pristine dining chairs before heading straight for the coffee machine, bypassing Layla entirely as if she were merely another appliance in the room. There was no trace of the cold, critical husband who had dissected her appearance the previous evening. Instead, he hummed a tune, poured himself a steaming mug of dark roast, and finally deigned to acknowledge her existence with a dazzling, superficial smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Layla watched him from the sink, her hands gripping the edge of the counter to keep them from trembling, not with fear this time, but with a simmering concoction of disbelief and clarity. She moved mechanically to pick up the jacket he had discarded, a habit ingrained in her after years of picking up after him. But as she lifted the fabric, the heavy weight of an envelope inside the inner breast pocket slapped against her side. Her fingers brushed against the thick, expensive cardstock, and before she could stop herself, she pulled it out, the cream-colored paper feeling cool and heavy in her hand. The calligraphy was elegant, embossed in gold leaf that caught the morning light, mocking her with its formality. Mr. Ryan Carter and spouse. The word spouse seemed to pulse on the page, a legal and social acknowledgement of her existence that Ryan had vehemently denied, and she realized with a jolt that stuck in her throat like a shard of glass that there was no policy against wives, no ban on partners, only a ban on her. She heard Ryan sigh with contentment as he took his first sip of coffee, and she quickly shoved the invitation behind her back, her fingers crumpling the edges slightly as she turned to face him, forcing a mask of neutrality onto her face. "Last night was fun," Ryan said, his voice smooth and conversational, rewriting history in real time as he leaned against the counter. "The boss kept asking about you, actually. Kept wondering where the elusive Mrs. Carter was. So I told him you were down with a terrible migraine, practically bedridden, and everyone was so sympathetic, sending their best wishes." The ease with which the lie rolled off his tongue was terrifying. A polished performance that made Layla wonder how much of their life together had been a fabrication. And she stared at him, watching the way he blew on his coffee, looking for a flicker of guilt that simply wasn't there. "Is that so?" Layla asked, her voice steady, though her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Well, the good news is that I'm feeling much better this morning. Fully recovered, in fact, so since tonight is the main gala, the actual big event, I can come with you." She stepped closer, invading his personal space just enough to see the panic flare in his pupils, and she lowered her voice to a tone of a submissive pleading that she knew would trigger his superiority complex. "I won't wear the red dress, Ryan, I promise. I can just wear that simple black one you like, the one that makes me look slender, and I'll just stand in the corner and hold your drink. I won't say a word to anyone." It was a test, a final, desperate offering of her dignity to see if there was any scrap of respect left in him, a chance for him to say yes, even conditionally, but the reaction was immediate and visceral. Ryan slammed his coffee mug down on the saucer with a clatter that echoed through the kitchen, his good mood evaporating instantly as his face contorted into a mask of annoyance. "Here we go again," he snapped, running a hand through his hair as if he were the one being victimized. "Why do you have to be so difficult, Layla? I already told you the tickets for tonight are extremely limited, strictly for top-tier management and high-value clients. There simply isn't a seat for you. And honestly, trying to squeeze you in now would just look desperate and unprofessional." He looked at her with a mixture of pity and disdain, shaking his head. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. Just stay home, order some takeout, and relax, because honestly, you'd hate it there anyway." Layla stood frozen, the lie hanging between them, thick and suffocating, because the invitation burning a hole in her palm didn't say admit one, it explicitly invited the couple, proving that he wasn't protecting her from the world, but protecting his fabricated image from the reality of her. "I understand," she said softly, a smile touching her lips that was colder than the winter air outside. A smile that Ryan, in his arrogance, mistook for submission. "Tickets are limited, of course." Ryan relaxed, patting her on the shoulder with a condescending affection, before turning away to head toward the bathroom, throwing over his shoulder that he needed to shower and get ready early for some pre-game strategy meetings. As soon as the bathroom door clicked shut and the sound of the shower started to hiss, Layla's posture shifted, the slumped shoulders of the defeated wife vanishing to reveal a woman made of steel. She pulled the invitation out from behind her back, staring at it one last time before placing it conspicuously on her vanity table, right next to her wedding ring. She didn't scream, she didn't cry, and she didn't pack a bag to leave. Instead, she picked up her phone and typed a message to Jenna with fingers that were steady and precise. "I need that favor," she typed, her thumbs flying across the screen. "I need the white dress, the one you said was too much, and I need the number for that celebrity makeup artist you used for your sister's wedding, the one who charges a fortune." She hit send and walked over to the mirror, looking at herself not through Ryan's eyes but through her own, seeing the strength in her jawline and the fire in her eyes. "He said there was no place for his wife," she whispered to the empty room, her voice low and dangerous. "So I won't go as his wife, I'll go as myself." She picked up a tube of dark crimson lipstick, uncapping it like a weapon, and applied a sharp, perfect line, the war paint for the battle she was about to wage, Tonight, she wouldn't be the burgundy curtains fading into the background. She would be the blinding white light that exposed every crack in his facade. The grand ballroom of the Hotel Pierre was a cavern of gold leaf and crystal, a suffocatingly opulent aquarium where the city's corporate elite swam in circles of expensive cologne and feigned interest. And right in the center of the strongest current stood Ryan Carter, holding court with a glass of single malt scotch in one hand and the attention of his junior colleagues in the other. He was in his element, the lights bouncing off his polished teeth as he recounted a heavily embellished version of the previous evening, leaning in to whisper to the wolf pack that his absence of a +1 was actually a mercy mission to save the firm from embarrassment because his wife had attempted to leave the house looking like a walking upholstery sample. The men laughed, a chorus of sycophantic chuckles that fed Ryan's ego like gasoline, and he felt invincible, a man untethered by the dead weight of a partner who didn't understand the nuance of his world, completely unaware that the atmosphere in the room was about to shift with the violence of a sudden drop in barometric pressure. The change began at the far end of the hall, a ripple of silence that started at the double mahogany doors and spread outward like a shockwave, causing conversations to falter and heads to turn, and Ryan, annoyed that the spotlight had drifted from his anecdote, turned around with a scoff ready on his lips, only to have the sound die in his throat as if he had been punched in the solar plexus. Standing at the top of the short staircase that led down to the dance floor was Layla, but it was not the Layla he had left crying in a bathrobe that morning, nor was it the insecure woman tugging at a burgundy hem. This was a stranger made of stardust and steel. She was wearing a floor-length gown of blinding white silk that clung to her figure like a second skin before cascading down in a fluid pool around her feet, the off-shoulder neckline exposing the rich, glowing expanse of her décolletage and shoulders which shimmered under the chandeliers. And her hair, the hair he had called wild, was loose, forming a halo of dark curls that made her look not unkempt, but regal, like a queen surveying a kingdom she intended to conquer. The silence in the room was not the awkward hush of embarrassment that Ryan had predicted, but the collective intake of breath that accompanies the arrival of something undeniably magnificent. And as Layla took her first step down, the click of her heel echoing against the marble, Ryan felt a cold sweat break out along his hairline because he realized with terrifying clarity that she wasn't just attending the party, she was the party. Panic, sharp and jagged, clawed at his throat as he scanned the room to see if Mr. Ward, the CEO, had noticed this unauthorized variable. And seeing the older man's back currently turned, Ryan abandoned his drink on a passing waiter's tray and surged forward, moving with a desperate, jerky speed that contrasted humiliatingly with Layla's slow liquid grace. He intercepted her near a decorative pillar, grabbing her upper arm with a grip that was tight enough to bruise, dragging her slightly into the shadows away from the main thoroughfare, his eyes darting around wildly to ensure their confrontation remained private. "Are you crazy?" he hissed through clenched teeth, his voice a venomous whisper that vibrated with fear, his charming mask completely dissolved to reveal the terrified bully beneath. "What the hell are you doing here, Layla?" She didn't flinch at his touch or his tone. Instead, she looked down at his hand gripping her arm as if it were a piece of trash that had blown onto her sleeve, and then she raised her eyes to his, her expression serene and terrifyingly calm. "The invitation on the counter said Ryan and spouse," she replied, her voice steady and audible over the low hum of the jazz band. "I am your spouse, Ryan, or did you marry someone else between breakfast and dinner?" Ryan released her arm as if burned, wiping his hand on his pants, his face flushing a mottled red as he tried to regain control of a situation that was spiraling rapidly out of his grasp. "Go home," he ordered, leaning in close so his breath hot with scotch hit her face. "Get a taxi and go home right now. Look at you. You look completely lost. It's humiliating. Everyone is staring at you and laughing." Layla didn't retreat. She stepped closer, invading his personal space until he was forced to step back, and she looked over his shoulder at the room where dozens of eyes were indeed fixed on them, but there was no mockery in their gazes, only curiosity and admiration. "They are staring, Ryan," she said, a small cold smile touching her lips as she turned her attention back to his sweating face. But nobody's laughing, except perhaps at you, because you're the only one trembling. Before Ryan could formulate another threat, a commanding, warm voice cut through the tension like a knife through butter, and he froze as Claire Ward, the CEO's wife and the matriarch of the company's social circle, materialized from the crowd with a beaming smile directed entirely at Layla. "Oh my God!" Claire exclaimed, bypassing Ryan completely to take Layla's hands in hers, her eyes sweeping over the white dress with genuine delight. "Ryan, is this why you've been hiding her away so carefully?" Ryan stood paralyzed, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, trapped in the wreckage of his own lies as he was forced to pivot instantly from abuser to doting husband, a transition that was physically painful to watch. He stammered something incoherent, wiping his palms on his tuxedo trousers, but neither woman was looking at him. Layla was smiling at Claire, a genuine, dazzling smile that lit up her face, and in that moment, Ryan realized with a sinking dread that the power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been obliterated. He was no longer the gatekeeper of this world. He was merely the breathless, sweaty man standing in the shadow of the woman he had called ugly, and as the CEO, Mr. Ward, turned around to see what the commotion was about, Ryan knew that the night he had planned to be his coronation was rapidly turning into his execution. The VIP table was an island of enforced civility amidst the sea of the gala, a circular fortress of white linen and crystal where the air was thinner and the stakes were infinitely higher. And seated right beside the formidable Mr. Ward, Layla Carter was performing a masterclass in grace that stood in stark, blinding contrast to the caricature her husband had painted of her for years. Ryan sat across from her, his knuckles white as he gripped the stem of his wineglass, watching in a state of nauseous disbelief as Layla charmed the CEO not with loud jokes or sycophancy, but with an intelligent, quiet warmth that seemed to draw people in like moths to a flame, discussing the nuances of the charity's literacy program with a depth of knowledge that Ryan didn't even know she possessed because he had never bothered to ask her about her volunteer work. Every time Layla laughed, a soft, melodic sound that didn't grate on the ears but rather invited others to smile, Ryan felt a fresh bead of sweat trickle down his spine because he could see the narrative he had carefully constructed, the narrative of the long-suffering husband with the embarrassing, unpolished wife, disintegrating with every second she spent behaving like the most elegant woman in the room. He was trapped in a silent scream, praying for the dinner to end, praying for a fire alarm, praying for anything that would stop the inevitable collision between his lies and her reality. But fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor and decided to arrive in the form of Tiffany, a junior associate with a penchant for honesty and zero social filter. Tiffany, who was seated 2 chairs down and had been eyeing Layla's dress with undisguised envy all evening, suddenly leaned forward during a lull in the conversation, her voice carrying that distinct, piercing quality of someone who has had one too many glasses of champagne and thinks they are whispering when they are actually projecting to the back of the room. "I have to say, Layla, that dress is absolutely stunning," Tiffany announced, oblivious to the way Ryan's eyes bulged in panic. Which is so weird, because just yesterday in the Wolfpack group chat, Ryan was telling everyone you were planning to wear something that looked like, what was it, cheap curtains from a flea market? He said he was so embarrassed he was going to make you stay home. The words hung in the air like a cloud of toxic gas, instantly sucking the oxygen out of the conversation and freezing the motion of every fork and knife at the table, turning the pleasant clatter of dining into a silence so profound and heavy that it felt physical, pressing down on Ryan's chest until he couldn't breathe. Mr. Ward slowly lowered his silverware to his plate with a deliberate metallic click that sounded like a judge's gavel, his gaze shifting from the terrified junior associate to Ryan, his eyes narrowing with a look that was no longer friendly or professional, but deeply, disappointedly appraising. "Is that so, Carter?" Mr. Ward asked, his voice low and dangerous, stripping away the title and the familiarity, leaving Ryan exposed as just a man who insulted his wife for sport. "You said that about your wife?" Ryan opened his mouth, his brain firing rapidly in a desperate attempt to find an escape route, but all he could manage was a wet, breathless chuckle that sounded pathetic, even to his own ears, as he looked around the table, seeking an ally and finding only cold stares. "Oh, come on, sir, it's just locker room talk, you know how it is," Ryan stammered, his smile trembling, as he turned his gaze to Layla, his eyes wide with a mixture of pleading and a silent, desperate threat that begged her to play along, to save him, to be the doormat one last time. "Layla knows my sense of humor, don't you, honey? It was just a joke among the guys. She knows I didn't mean it." The entire table turned to look at Layla, waiting for her to absolve him, to laugh it off and restore the comfort of the evening. And for a heartbeat, Ryan thought she might do it, thought the years of conditioning would kick in, and she would protect his fragile ego at the cost of her own dignity. But Layla simply placed her linen napkin on the table with a smooth, deliberate motion, smoothing out a non-existent wrinkle before lifting her head to look directly at her husband, her eyes devoid of anger but filled with a pity that was far more devastating than rage. She turned to Mr. Ward, her voice calm, clear, and laced with a terrifying poise that silenced the room completely. "No, Mr. Ward, Ryan wasn't joking," she said, and the gentleness of her tone made the words cut deeper than any shout could have. "Ryan takes his public image very seriously, you see, and sometimes he gets deeply insecure when the accessories he has curated for his life begin to shine a little brighter than he does." She paused, letting the implication sink in, letting everyone see the small, frightened man hiding behind the expensive suit. And then she delivered the final blow with a smile that was sharp enough to draw blood. "He was afraid I would overshadow him tonight, but I've always believed that a man of true substance and confidence shouldn't be afraid of his wife looking beautiful, don't you agree?" Ryan felt his soul leave his body as the truth stripped him naked in front of the people he wanted to impress the most. He saw the respect vanish from Mr. Ward's eyes, replaced by a cold distaste for a man who needed to belittle others to feel tall. Claire Ward, who had been watching the exchange with the intensity of a hawk, broke the silence by reaching out and patting Layla's hand, nodding with a firm, decisive approval. "Very well said, Layla," Claire stated, her voice ringing with finality. "Very well said indeed." The conversation at the table resumed, but the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. The group turned their shoulders inward, creating a closed circle that included Layla and excluded Ryan, leaving him sitting there in his tuxedo, physically present but socially exiled, a small, solitary figure drowning in the humiliation of his own making, while his wife shone like a diamond he had tried and failed to bury in the dark. The silence inside the apartment was absolute, a profound and heavy stillness that felt less like the absence of noise and more like the holding of breath before a final verdict is read. And in the center of the living room, standing like sentinels of a new life, were two large suitcases packed with a military precision that belied the chaos of the last few hours. Layla stood by the console table near the entryway, her movements calm and deliberate as she slid her diamond wedding band off her finger, feeling a phantom weight lift the moment the metal cleared her knuckle. And with a soft, decisive click that echoed in the quiet hallway, she placed the ring directly on top of Ryan's iPad, returning the symbol of his ownership to the device that had revealed his true nature. It was 11 o'clock at night, and she was no longer the woman who had stood in front of the mirror seeking approval in a burgundy dress. She was a woman who had seen the wizard behind the curtain and realized he was just a small man pulling levers. And when the front door finally crashed open, shattering the peace she had cultivated, she didn't flinch. Ryan stumbled into the entryway, a disheveled ruin of the polished executive who had held court at the gala only hours before, his tie undone and hanging loosely around his neck like a noose, his eyes bloodshot and swimming with a toxic cocktail of alcohol and humiliation. He brought the smell of stale scotch and desperation with him, filling the clean air of the apartment with his failure as he spotted Layla in the suitcases, his face twisting into a rictus of incredulous rage that masked his underlying terror. "Are you satisfied now?" he screamed, his voice cracking as he kicked the door shut behind him with a violence that shook the frame, pointing a trembling finger at her as if she were the villain in his tragedy. "You happy, Layla? You looked at Mr. Ward looking at me like I was some kind of idiot, didn't you? You ruined everything tonight. You destroyed my reputation, You destroyed my relationship with the partners. You took a sledgehammer to my entire career just to make a point. Layla stood her ground, her hand resting lightly on the handle of her suitcase, her expression unreadable and infuriatingly calm as she watched him unravel, refusing to absorb the blame he was trying to vomit onto her. I didn't destroy anything, Ryan, she said, her voice steady and cool, cutting through his heat like a glacial wind. You destroyed it yourself the moment you decided to tear down your wife to entertain a room full of strangers because they didn't look down on you because your wife was ugly. They looked down on you because your character is garbage. The truth of her words seemed to strike him physically, causing him to recoil before he surged forward, his strategy shifting instantly from aggression to a frantic, manipulative panic as he realized the suitcases weren't a threat, but a promise. He lunged to block the path to the door, his breathing ragged as he grabbed her shoulders, his grip desperate rather than possessive, trying to physically anchor her to the life he controlled. Where do you think you're going? He demanded, his voice dropping to a sneering, gaslighting whisper that had worked so many times before, trying to dismantle her reality. You think you can just leave? Who are you without me, Layla? I made you. I created this life for you. You walk out that door and you are nothing, just a washed-up 30-year-old black woman with no money and no prospects. Who is going to love you? Who is going to want you when you don't have me to give you value? Layla looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't see a husband or a provider. She saw a drowning man trying to use her as a life raft, and the pity she felt was swiftly replaced by a crystalline realization of her own worth. She reached into her purse and pulled out the legal envelope she had prepared earlier that afternoon, pressing it firmly against his chest, forcing him to release her shoulders and step back. You're right about one thing, Ryan, she said, looking straight into his bloodshot eyes with a gaze that was terrifying in its serenity. I am too ugly to stand next to you, but not for the reasons you think. I am too ugly for you because my spirit is far too beautiful to be tethered to a soul as rotten and small as yours. She tapped the envelope against his chest, watching his hands mechanically come up to take it, his face slack with shock. Sign it, or wait for my lawyer to serve you with a subpoena, but either way, we are done. She didn't wait for him to respond, didn't wait for the inevitable begging or the next wave of insults. She simply gripped her suitcases and walked past him, her shoulder brushing against his arm one last time as she stepped out of the apartment, leaving him standing alone in the hallway with the divorce papers in his hand and the wedding ring sitting on his iPad like a tombstone. The elevator ride down felt like an ascension rather than a descent, and when the doors opened to the lobby, she walked out into the cool night air where Jenna's car was idling at the curb, the headlights cutting through the darkness like beacons of hope. Layla loaded her bags into the trunk and slid into the passenger seat, and as the car pulled away from the curb, she rolled down the window, letting the wind whip through her hair, washing away the scent of Ryan's cologne and the stifling atmosphere of the penthouse. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with oxygen that tasted like possibility, and as the city lights blurred past her window, a final thought settled in her mind. Not as a question, but as a declaration of independence. He told me I didn't belong in his glittering world because I wasn't bright enough, she thought, watching her reflection in the side mirror. But I finally realized that I don't need to shine by reflecting his light. I generate my own. And that is how Layla Carter finally walked out of the shadows and into her own light. Now I'd love to hear your thoughts. Was there a specific moment in the story that made you cheer for Layla? Or perhaps a moment where you realized Ryan went too far? Let me know in the comments below how you would have handled that dinner party. Thank you so much for tuning in and following this journey with me. Remember to value your own worth and never let anyone dim your shine. Until next time, take care.